All right, hello grade sevens. Happy to see all of you, although I'm just imagining you because you're not here with me. But welcome to our class of grade 7 history. So my goal is to do one big video or several smaller videos that all kind of have the same content for you guys once a week, and to give you guys weekly work that will be due, and I'm going to be due Wednesdays. Okay, so Wednesday is going to be our history due date. Okay, so we're starting today, and everything that I'm going to give you is going to be due a week from now. All right, so we are starting chapter 2 of our Canadian history, and I know that some of you may not have your textbooks. You may have left them in your lockers at school, and that's totally fine. I have a scanner here, and I'm going to scan all the pages of the textbook, and they'll be there for you in your history section of your OneNote binder. Okay, so you can go in and you can read everything without actually having a hard copy of the textbook. Human style pages are always preferable because it's nice to flip, but if you don't have it, we can make it work. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to begin a bit of a lecture using my notes from the Canadian History Chapter 2 content. Now, normally I would have my notes up on the overhead projector, and I would torture you by having you all copy those notes down while I talk to you about what I think is important. And your skill would be to try to copy from the overhead projector while you're listening to me at the same time. Now, I can't ask you to do that here because I don't have a projector. So you're just looking at my face, which I know is not very exciting, but it's the way it has to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the notes. And then what I want you to do is I want you to listen to me talk. And if you can have a piece of paper in front of you and a pencil, then you can hear me and write down what you think is important based on what I'm talking about. And then you're going to take those handwritten notes and you're going to go into the copy of the notes that I've given you, and you can add your bullet points that you've discovered from our talk, or my talk to you. And then that becomes your notes. Okay, now some of you who are in my class have already been doing this. You were adding bullet point notes. I was going in, I was looking, I was seeing them there. That's fantastic. Okay, so it's that idea, again, carried forward. However, now you can just focus on what I'm saying, write down what you think is important, and then add that in, okay? We're gonna continue with our inquiry process where you guys are gonna be writing for me, and I'm gonna be marking that. I'm not really sure yet how I'm gonna do the testing. I haven't quite figured that out. I'm considering the idea of maybe sending a copy of the test to your parents via email, having them print it off and give it to you, but I know that may not work for every family. You may not have a printer. So I've got to give that some more thought, but we're going to definitely continue with the inquiry process. And that inquiry work becomes even more important if we don't have a test, because that becomes our sole, my sole piece of information as to how you're doing. Okay? So let's just dive right in. Chapter 2, Canadian history. So what have we done so far? We've talked about New France. We've talked about the habitants and the seigneurs that are living together on the seigneurie. And this is the main part of what New France is. It's the rural part of New France. Okay, this is where they're going to be doing all their farming, where they're having all their livestock. This is the main hub of that. However, as time passes and New France becomes more and more established, we have the growth of towns. So these towns are now being built up in places like Quebec City and Montreal. And these are the main two that are happening at this time. And so if you look at the world today, in Canada today, we have rural areas, and then we have huge cities like Toronto. And this is kind of a similar thing where you have these cities of Quebec City and Montreal, and those are the main hubs, and then you have these rural areas that are these seigneuries where the farming is taking place. Okay, so within these city type hubs, we have a variety of people working with a variety of jobs. It's not just your farmer who's your habitant, and your landowner, who's your seigneurie. Now we have a variety of people doing a variety of jobs, and these are skilled laborers who are making fairly good money doing this. I have a list here. I'm just going to look over at my list. So we have soldiers, carpenters, masons, tailors, merchants, townsmen, bakers, millers, coopers, butchers, surgeons, pastry cooks, bailiffs, locksmiths, notaries, teachers, and printers. So these people are all working and they're all making good money. Some of these words may not be familiar to you, like a cooper. What does a cooper do? This could be your topic of inquiry. You might say, I want to learn more about what a cooper does, and I'm going to dive into that one. But all of these people have a skill, and they're all making good money. The habitants and the seigneurs who are living on the seigneuries, they might get into a canoe or into a small boat because they have access to the water. And they might get in that boat, and then they might travel over to that town using the waterways to get there because they want to visit the miller, or they want to visit the cooper, or they want to see the surgeon. Okay, so those types of people are localized in those main towns, and yeah, so that's really how that works. So those are people who are making a good living. They are living well. They have a skill that they're able to sell things and then make money in order to feed themselves for the winter, and they're feeling comfortable. Below those people, we have people who are not doing nearly as well. There's a whole set of people who are called indentured servants. And these people, everyone is coming from France, okay? And these indentured servants, they are starting off their lives in France, and they are poor. And they're looking for a better life, and they don't have hardly any opportunity in France. And so what they do is they sign a contract, and they say, within this contract, I can barely afford to feed myself today. I don't have any money to be able to afford the boat ride that's going to get me from France over to to North America, into New France. But if someone will pay for me to be able to have a spot on a boat and to have food for that journey that's going to take me, a month or more on that boat, in return for the money that you're investing in me to be able to get me over to New France, I'm going to work for free for whoever pays for me. So there might be a banker who's living in Montreal or Quebec City who says, I'd like to have a servant in my house. So I'm going to pay for someone to come over from New France. I'm going to pay for their boat ride. I'm going to pay for their food along the trip. And then when they get into New France here with me, they're going to owe me 3 years of service for free. They're going to work for me for 3 years for free. And at the end of that 3 years of service, they've paid off that debt, and now they become free themselves. And so these indentured servants, that's exactly what they're doing. They're working off the cost of that boat ride. But they're willing to do it because they know at the end of that 3 years, or however long that service is, they become free. And now they're in a place where they can, maybe they can get a farm, and they can grow their family and have a good and prosperous life. So for them, that 3 years of labor is worth it. So what would these indentured servants be doing? Well, a lot of them would be working on farms. They could be clearing land. They could be lifting those heavy rocks. They could be putting down trees. They could be lifting the stumps out of the ground. This is really hard work. Today, if we're trying to clear land, we've got huge equipment and machinery in order to help us with that. Those huge tractors with bucket scoops and all that. Back then, they didn't have any of this type of equipment. They had to do everything with the help of horses and their bare hands. And so they would have indentured servants to do all that really, really hard, sweaty, hard labor. But if you were a woman, maybe you would be working domestically in someone's house as a servant. For somebody who's fairly rich, you'd be doing all the cooking, all the washing, all the cleaning, that sort of work. So yeah, there were also a couple of some criminals who also came over. So what would happen is, if somebody was convicted of a crime back in France, let's say, for example, they're so poor, they can't afford anything. They can't even eat. They have no money for food. There's no such thing as welfare. There's no such thing as a government handout. They're going to starve, right? So maybe that that desperation would lead them to try to steal. Maybe they would try to steal some bread so that they would have food. They would be caught. They would be thrown into prison. The prison sentence for stealing a loaf of bread would be tremendously long. And for the government, in order to house them in prison for that amount of time, for that crime, they'd be feeding them day after day, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense for the government to feed a person and to house them in a prison for a crime like that. It costs the government money. So the government was looking for opportunities to offload these criminals. And they thought, well, you know what we can do? We can send them across the ocean over to New France, where they can become indentured servants and they can work off their prison sentence. And at the end of their prison sentence, when they've done their time for whatever crime that they've committed, they'll then become free people and have the freedom of a new life in the new land. And so there were criminals who did that as well. So people who were really poor, people who are criminals, there was opportunity for them in New France as well. Okay, who else was there? There were also some slaves. So there were some slaves that were owned by people. Mostly the slaves came from the Caribbean area. There were, I think, only about 400 slaves in the entire history of New France. But there was some slavery. And these are people who have no hope of freedom, right? The indentured servants, they know after their 3 years of hard time, they'll be free. But these slaves, they know that until the day they die, they're a slave. They have no other option. And there were some people who were in that situation. And there were also First Nations peoples who were living kind of on the outskirts of civilized town life. They were never really accepted because this is really a period of time where people are quite racist. So they were never really truly accepted, but they were like to be part of that coureur de bois fur trading kind of system where they could get money for the valuable things that they could bring in, the furs that they could trap and hunt for. So they were also part of that system as well. I have here, I was going to show you here, you can't really see it very well. I have here a book which is showing you the town of the Quebec City. I'm gonna scan this in and send it to you as well. My scanner here only can do single pages, and this is like a double. So I'll scan the one side, and there's lots of things to read and look at, and then we'll scan the other side separate. And you kind of have to kind of imagine in your eye the two pages kind of joining together like that, but it's better than nothing. And that gives you an additional glimpse into the life, the city life of New France.